Evet, şimdi sırada yine önemli bir sunum, önemli bir konuşmacı. Jamie Bartlett geliyor. Efendim, The Darknet, Inside the Digital Underworld adlı şarkısı, konuşması. Ama şarkı da olurmuş değil mi? Dark Inside the Digital. Neyse efendim, alkışlarla Jamie Bartlett geliyor.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Thanks very much for having me in your wonderful city and wonderful location. I am, as you've guessed, one of those British people who is very impractical and hopefully not too boring for you. Hopefully not, in fact, because I'm going to speak to you about the Darknet. Thank you.
All right.
I think I can work out how to use this. I'm going to speak to you about the Darknet and why I think it matters to all of the people in this room. Now, you're probably one of the most knowledgeable audiences that I've ever had the fortune to address. And there's probably nothing I can tell you about specifics on malware or software you need to use. But I want to talk about the trends. I want to talk about some of the non-technological reasons that the Darknet is very important. That's not the Darknet, that's Walt Disney. Now, how many people know what this is? Okay, yeah, you see, pretty good, pretty good. So this is the Tor Browser. It was originally invented by the US Naval Research Department about a decade ago or so as a way of allowing their intelligence operatives to be able to browse the normal internet without giving away their IP address. Lots of good reasons that someone working for US Naval Intelligence would want to be able to do that. And they did it with a very clever piece of software engineering. Encrypting the network traffic in 3 layers of encryption. That's why it's called Tor. It stands for the onion router. It's meant to be like peeling the layers of an onion. And your network traffic goes via usually 3 nodes, 3 computers that have this software downloaded. Each time unpeeling a layer of encryption before sending it on to another node in that network. Very, very clever stuff. The only problem was this is a non-standard protocol, so everybody who ever saw a Tor protocol would know immediately that it was US Naval Intelligence on their website. This is completely pointless, really. So they decided to open source this, make it available to everybody, or anybody. And it became a much loved tool for privacy advocates, for journalists. I use it regularly, for civil liberties groups around the world, because it both gives you a certain degree of privacy or anonymity, and allows you to circumnavigate certain network blocks. Now, there's something like 3 to 4 million daily users of this web browser, dotted all around the world. And most people use it to go onto the normal internet. Now, I'm not going to advise people in this room to download this and use this. I understand that the Turkish government at the moment has instigated maybe a temporary ban on using VPNs and Tor browsers. But there is a problem, of course, because every time any type of internet censorship takes place anywhere in the world, there is usually an increase in the number of people that start looking for ways to get around it. And this is no exception. So the Tor browser is used mainly on the normal internet, but it's also used to access the Darknet, the Tor hidden services. It's a network of between 5 and maybe 30,000 sites, which each URL finishes in .onion. The URLs are a meaningless string of numbers and letters. You can't get there with the normal browser, only with this browser. And because it uses the same protocol, it's incredibly difficult to censor or remove. And this is the Darknet, a kind of digital underworld, a kind of place where anonymous web browsers are visiting websites that are very difficult to censor. And so I guess you can imagine what sort of place and what sort of things you will find on that network. And it's not always bad things. Lots of people use it to whistleblow. And so one of the most popular sites on the Darknet is the New Yorker, the veritable American magazine which has a site for whistleblowers. The entire WikiLeaks cache is available as a Darknet site. If you don't want to go and buy my excellent book in the bookshops, you can easily get one for free from a pirated Tor library. So don't go and do that. Infamous drugs markets, which I'm going to talk you through in a moment, and increasingly, and I think very importantly for people here, the kind of hacking as a service. So a decade ago, 5 years ago even, you needed to have some reasonably good level of understanding about network security or programming languages to be a computer hacker. Not really anymore. It's very easy to go onto these sites and either commission somebody to do your hacking for you, or just to download some software and plug it in and off you go. So that is the Darknet. Lots of creativity, very, very interesting, but lots of pretty dangerous stuff going on there too. And I'm going to first show you the Darknet markets, because these are the most infamous parts of the Darknet, and ones which I think are extremely important to you. Now, when I first heard about these sites, these drugs markets, I went on there to try to work out what they were all about, and I never imagined them to be like this, because this is just Amazon or eBay, but for illicit goods. And so, as you can see, you can kind of guess how this works. By the way, the Silk Road, as you may know, was closed down by the FBI in 2013, but only after 18 months of trade between hundreds of thousands of people and in excess of $1 billion worth of trade that passed through this site, earning Ross Ulbricht, who ran this site, $10,000 a day in commissions. So you can kind of work out already how it works. I assume you've all been on Amazon and eBay. You have hundreds of different products available to buy. You have hundreds of different vendors that are offering their services. You sign up to the site, you browse through the options, you make your choice. You communicate using an encrypted messaging app with the vendors. You pay with the cryptocurrency Bitcoin, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, and then you get the products delivered to your home. Or not to your home, maybe that's unwise, maybe to an address that you have access to. That's how these marketplaces work. So they use very clever encryption. They use cryptocurrencies. But the real secret behind these markets isn't actually any of that stuff. It's the way that they have unleashed a competitive marketplace in what was, as drugs is in much of the world, a cartel and a monopoly. And that is incredibly important, because that explains why these sites have become so popular. Forget all the encryption for a second. This is about a competitive marketplace that links buyers and sellers. So look how familiar all of this is. You have the price in cryptocurrency. Look in the top. I don't know if this has got a little thing here? You've got a little basket up there, which is familiar. This button here says, report this item. Not to the authorities, of course. You report this item to a site administrator who will investigate the vendor if they think that they are misadvertising or falsely advertising their products. Now, the reason these have worked simple principle, same as Amazon or eBay, it's user reviews. So every single person that goes onto these sites, after receiving their product, gives a score out of 5 for their product, and detailed written feedback for their product. And as a result, as any economist would predict, what has happened on these markets is that price has started to go down, and product quality has started to go up. Because you have hundreds of vendors competing with each other for your repeat custom. You'll never find a more friendly and attentive drug dealer than on one of these Darknet marketplaces, because they are desperate in the same way as Amazon or eBay for your 5-star review. So this is the secret of these marketplaces. People, I think, have tended to misunderstand why they have become so incredibly popular. And as a result of this kind of unleashing of creativity and competition, they have become incredibly innovative places, partly because they operate on the fringes. So you have, for example, vendors on these marketplaces that claim to be selling fair trade and organic cocaine that is being sourced from Guatemalan farmers, not from Colombian drugs lords. There's even dealers here that claim to be reinvesting 10% of their profits in local education programs. This is the kind of crazy stuff that happens there. Now, because they are operating in the fringes, because they are constantly under attack from other hackers, from the FBI or the National Crime Agency or every other crime agency in the world, they have to be incredibly creative in how to both evade detection and also how to stay online. And so you have all sorts of interesting mechanisms that they have developed. Now, this site went down in 2013. But since then, you have had dozens of others that have popped up in their place, slightly more difficult to censor, slightly more difficult to control, and with all sorts of innovative mechanisms for making sure that there is some degree of consumer protection. Let's take the payment system for a second. So the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. Most people here are fairly familiar with Bitcoin. It's a kind of digital cash. It allows you to send a digital cash to anyone in the world pretty much instantaneously. It is quick and secure. It's pseudonymous because your Bitcoin address, your Bitcoin wallet, is not necessarily tied to an individual identity or an individual person. But there is a public database of every Bitcoin transaction that's ever made that anybody can see and verify. Now, the problem with cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, and that is the currency of choice on these sites, is that if you send your cryptocurrency to a drug dealer and they disappear with your cryptocurrency, you don't have much recourse. You can't phone the police and complain about it. Although people have actually done that in the past, believe it or not. And so the community of people that run these sites worked out some ways of getting around this problem, which they called multi-signature escrow payments. So if you have 3 parties involved in a transaction, a buyer, a vendor, and a site administrator, when the buyer chooses the products, they will send their Bitcoin to a wallet that is run by the site. The vendor sees that the money is in the wallet, sends the product to the buyer, and when 2 of the 3 parties involved in that transaction, the vendor, the buyer, or the site administrator, sign off on the product or the sale with their crypto key, the money is released to the vendor. Pretty simple, but very effective way of ensuring there is some degree of consumer protection. Then they worked out there was another problem with Bitcoin. That public database that I mentioned. Well, if you're very clever, you might be able to do some network analysis, and maybe you could figure out who was behind a transaction. And so they invented a kind of a micro-laundering system, whereby people would send their Bitcoin to a wallet. Hundreds of people would send their Bitcoin to a wallet. The Bitcoins would get jumbled up because they're just a string of numbers. And then the correct amount, but different Bitcoin, would go on to the intended destination. It's just like a little way of adding a bit more security to the transaction, a kind of micro-laundering system that's very easy and very quick. Now, this is the secret of these darknet markets: innovative, creative, and competitive. And I showed you these examples because they demonstrate this. But this is the important thing. Darknet markets are growing. There's more and more users of these markets all the time. And importantly, it is not only narcotics that are for sale on them. And in fact, the character of these markets is changing quite quickly. In fact, if I just go back to this one, when I was researching this site back in 2013, 2014, this, by the way, was replaced by the Silk Road 2 when it was shut down, and then by the Silk Road 3 when the Silk Road 2 was shut down, and so on and so on. On the Silk Road 2, while I was researching it, the number one selling item in April 2014 was not drugs at all. It was counterfeit £20 Tesco shopping vouchers that were being sold for £8 each. And thousands of these things were being shipped out. So these are anonymous marketplaces. They're not drugs markets. And that's extremely important for your line of work. Just a final statistic on this. I managed to get from this site about 100,000 pieces of feedback that had been left over a 3-month period. And the 95% of the scores that people had given to the vendors was 5 stars out of 5. That's the secret of these marketplaces. So, I went back onto some of the darknet markets recently, a few days ago in fact, to look at how some of it is evolving. And as I said, this is not just about drugs, and increasingly, and it has changed a lot, even since the 2 or 3 years that I've been working on this. Increasingly, one of the very big and growing parts of these marketplaces is stolen data. Stolen data is very easy to sell, it's increasingly easy to get, and there is a huge market of vendors and buyers who are willing to go onto these marketplaces and trade in this stolen data. And these marketplaces all work in the same way as the Silk Road, as I showed you. So this is taken from just a couple of, maybe it's a week old, maybe it's slightly more than a week old, but as you can see, this is the same kind of principle. You have all sorts of different products available, counterfeit, digital products, jewelry. But one of the top selling items, and you can look at all the different ways that you can select your product, that's how kind of refined these markets are becoming. Visa cards, MasterCard, I'm not sure if you can see this very well, but a huge and growing marketplace in stolen data. Here's an example. It gives you a kind of sense of the sort of things that there are available, the sorts of prices that things are going for. This is $50 for a fresh Visa card, i.e. it hasn't already been stolen and used, with the CVV code on it, ships from anywhere, comes from the USA. It doesn't really matter where it comes from, to be honest. And you have the same kind of principles. This vendor is considered to have a trust level of 7 and a vendor level of 8, meaning that they're reasonably well trusted. They have a long history of positive feedback from other buyers, and so you can trust them. About 6 months ago or so, maybe in this room you won't have seen this, but in the UK there was a very large data breach from one of our telecommunications companies called Talktalk. And within, I think, about 200,000 pieces of customer data was stolen. And that included, I suppose, all the usual stuff: billing details, address, passwords, all the stuff that's valuable for people that want to try to fraud somebody. And within a couple of within a couple of hours, it was available on a special Darknet site that had been set up solely with the purpose of selling this stolen data. And you can see here, $2.75 for one item. And again, you have all sorts of different options. Talk customer data. A little more recently, this was maybe only 2 or 3 months ago, I was involved in trying to understand why O2 customer data was being sold on a Darknet site as well. And I can't express just how quickly these marketplaces are just throwing up new products all the time. So suddenly a load of O2, one of our biggest telecommunications companies, suddenly a load of their data was coming up. This again was customer data. It was passwords to the O2 accounts that people held, their passwords, their usernames, their telephone numbers. And I got in touch with O2. And O2 said, we haven't had any data breaches. We've checked with our security. Our servers are completely fine. We don't know why this data is being sold. But we bought some of this data and checked it. We bought it and phoned up the people whose data was being stolen and asked them whether this was their correct password and username, and it was. And we couldn't work out what on earth had happened. Well, it turns out, about a year ago, a gaming site had been hacked into, and 500,000 records, usernames and passwords were stolen and were being sold on, you guessed it, a Darknet site. Now, we have to manage hundreds of passwords in our lives now, don't we? It's exhausting. You can't remember what your password is, and so everyone tends to use the same password and username. Let's be honest. And what happened here was that somebody bought thousands of these records and just started trying them out on O2, on eBay, on Amazon. Because so many people had used the same password and username on their gaming site as they had for their O2 account and their eBay account and their Amazon account and their Facebook account and so on. And this is called credential stuffing. And so what you had here is a kind of secondary, or almost like a tertiary market in stolen, second-hand stolen data. Stuff that had already been stolen that was being repackaged up and then sold on. But it worked because enough people hadn't changed their passwords to make sure that you couldn't get into their other accounts too. This is constant recycling, a constant thriving market of people trying to figure out how they can make money from this. Now, this will be familiar, I'm sure, to many of you. It's ransomware. This is standard ransomware screen that you get when you accidentally click on the wrong piece of malware. It's usually a Trojan attack, which then encrypts your hard drive, and then you have to pay a ransom to get the hard drive decrypted. Now, when I started working on the Darknet, this it had been invented, of course, but it wasn't being sold as a service. It wasn't being sold as a product on the Darknet. But increasingly it is. In fact, it is one of the fastest growing products. Ransomware as a service is one of the fastest growing products anywhere on the Darknet. Now, this company here, Citrix, one of your gold sponsors, in fact, did a really good report on ransomware and surveyed a load of medium and large British companies and found that something like a third of them are stockpiling Bitcoin because they're so worried about getting hit with a ransomware attack that they want to make sure that they have Bitcoin ready to pay for it when they do. Millions of dollars are now being extorted out of people as a result of this, including police departments who have paid. In fact, the Department of Justice in the US has sometimes said, just pay it. It's too difficult to work out how you're going to get around this. If you need the stuff, just pay for it. Companies are losing time and money, maybe, and they probably have got good data backup plans, but the amount of time and money and lost productivity and worried staff and anxiety that happens when one of these attacks takes place is, of course, worth maybe as much or more as the ransom that you might have to pay. So ransomware is becoming a significant problem, particularly as a service on the darknet. And guess what? It operates in the same way again. It is a marketplace of people that are selling ransomware in all sorts of different ways. Perhaps if you're technically minded, you can just download it and send it off if you want. Typically, you can buy a package, which is the ransomware, the kind of piece of software itself, along with hundreds of thousands of email addresses that you can send it out to en masse. If you want to get involved as a service, there are people that will sell it. I'm not sure if you can see this in clearly enough, but people who are in exactly the same way, giving you all of the breakdown in kind of how to make this work, how to make this operate. One of the most interesting new ways that people are using this is simply to say, let's do a kind of sharing deal on this. So you give me the email addresses, I'll send it out, and we'll share the ransom. We'll go 50-50 on the ransom. This is growing at an incredible rate, and I think it's going to continue to grow. So, usually when I give this talk, then they're people who aren't technical. They're people that don't understand this world. And they're usually absolutely terrified. The first thing they do is change their passwords because they've realized they've used the same passwords over and over again. But you people understand this. You know the kinds of risks that are out there, the threats that are out there. But I wanted to show you exactly how I think the darknet markets in particular and the growing use of privacy-enhancing software, anonymity-enhancing software, is going to make for an even more turbulent time ahead. And the reason is this, and I'm just going to summarize, I'm just going to finish by giving you a couple of the kind of bigger trends and why and what I think you can do in response. The first thing I want you to kind of take away from this is the power of a market. The fact that there are now always online marketplaces that are operating and that are providing all of these services in a highly competitive manner. That is to say, they are always looking for ways of making themselves get a better offer for the consumer. And these ransomware people are constantly saying, oh, you know, we can split it. One person will say we can split it 50-50, and then the next person will turn up and say, well, we'll split it 55-45 for you. And then the next one will come and compete and say, no, we'll do it 60-40 for you. And they're always looking for ways of making this work better for the consumer, which means, as I've said, there's always a kind of ready body of people out there that are willing and able to get involved. So this kind of creation of a marketplace, the creativity that it unleashes, the competition that it unleashes, it's not going to go away. In fact, it's going to get worse. And it's going to mean that all of the things that are for sale already are going to continue to grow. And goodness knows, I can't even imagine in 2 or 3 years' time, which is a lifetime in security research, what kind of new things are available, what kind of new offers are being sold on these marketplaces. The second thing is, the big trend here, I think, is the way that it lowers the barriers to entry. As I said before with that hacker for hire service, you no longer need to be a technical specialist to get involved in serious cybercrime. In fact, for a lot of particularly younger people, it's remarkably easy to jump online, download some software, or hire somebody else to do it all for you. Now, I remember when I was 13 years old, I was caught stealing one of those. Do you remember WWF, that American wrestling thing? A strange American wrestling thing that everyone watched 25 years ago. I stole one of those from a shop with my friend. Oh, terrible thing to do. I got in so much trouble. I learned a valuable lesson about not being stupid, and that was the end of it. Now, the equivalent now is that it's easy to go online and steal 500 credit card details without even realizing potentially quite how serious a crime that actually is. So lowering the barriers to entry into various types of cybercrime brings all sorts of new possible people into that world, including various terrorist groups, extremist networks, pre-existing drugs gangs, criminal gangs, and even in some cases quite hapless young people who don't really know what they're doing. So they're the big trends. They're the kind of meta trends that are just going to continue to really affect the way that your world works. But of course, that also means, I think, 2 or 3 valuable and useful things for you. In addition to it meaning that basically everyone's job in here is going to be secure for the next 10 or 15 years because the threat's just going to get bigger. Many of the things that are taking place on the Darknet, of course, are extremely valuable and useful for people who are concerned with internet security. If there's any companies in here that are interested in how we can use cryptocurrencies to create some kind of secure and fast payment system, you won't find anywhere more experienced than Darknet markets in using them, because they've been doing this since 2011. They have a huge amount of experience in how you use cryptocurrencies. Stuff like the Tor web browser, which, yes, is valuable when you're a criminal trying to avoid detection, is also incredibly valuable when you're a business person who wants to go online and talk about potentially confidential company information while being confident that the country you're in isn't watching what you're doing. The internal messaging systems of these sites, they all use pretty good privacy, PGP encryption as default in the messages that are sent. Again, another kind of very, very quick, easy, simple way of making sure that your communications are secure, relatively secure. So in these darknet corners, you will often find some extremely important messages, some extremely important techniques to make sure that your own companies are secure. The other thing is, these darknet markets are an extremely important early warning signal of possible data breaches. So you saw earlier the 500 million Yahoo accounts that were stolen. They have been being sold on the Darknet for a very long time. And in fact, it was some researchers finding those accounts on a Darknet marketplace that first broke this story. So for people that are working in this area and that are looking for the latest trends in cybersecurity, in various zero-day exploits, in stolen data, more often than not, you will find them being sold very quickly on a darknet market. And I think there is an extremely important job for security researchers to work out how they can safely and securely analyze and monitor these markets to be aware of trends. And the final thing I'd say is just the general place. This is a very, very dark and weird corner of the internet, but it's an incredibly creative one. Cryptocurrency Bitcoin is now worth billions of dollars. There's so much innovation and creativity around Bitcoin. And it was invented in 2009 in a very obscure cryptography forum. And it was used for the first 2 years of its life. It was used almost entirely on one of these marketplaces. But people have worked out that the underlying software behind Bitcoin, the fact that it has a public ledger, a database that everyone can see, where all the transactions are publicly recorded and verified by other users, is in fact pretty revolutionary. And now all of the world's big companies, Barclays Bank, Lloyds Bank, Deloitte, Accenture, are investing money in how they can use that underlying software, blockchain it's called, to come up with new ways of recording information, come up with new ways of verifying information, of having multiple user entry-only databases, and it's potentially going to really quite transform the way records are stored and held. This came from an obscure forum in 2009, used on the Darknet. Who knows what currently is being discussed there that might be as innovative, as important in 5 years' time from now. So in summary, it's a pretty creative, pretty terrifying, very innovative place. And I think everything it says to me is that it's going to make the world, the digital world, cybersecurity, far more turbulent, far more unpredictable, far more important as an area of work. And also, hopefully, in these creative and innovative places, there might be some of the solutions to be found for some of the problems that we face. And with that, I'll stop, and thank you very much for listening. Do you have time for questions?
Jamie'ye soru sormak isterseniz, Jamie 1-2 dakika sorularınızı da alabilir veya arada da arzu ediyorsanız Jamie'ye soruları sorabilirsiniz. Most probably we're going to do it in the break time. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you Jamie. Evet efendim, anlattıklarına baktık Jamie'nin. Yani şurada yemin ediyorum içim sızladı ya. Ne pis bir ortammış la bu internet. Tam tabiriyle. Yani ben de 1-2 ayıpçı siteye giriyorum da kendimi yargılıyorum. Neler yapıyor Allah'mış ya. Şimdi yeğenler, annemin evindeyiz. Bir küçük yeğenlerim var. Benim de annem hacı bir kadın, yani Allah uzun ömür versin, yaşlıca. Yeğenler de böyle ellerinde tablet oynuyorlar falan. Ben de salonda oturuyorum. Annem girdi salona. Ne yapıyorsunuz afacanlar dedi. İşte anneanne internete giriyoruz. Girin girin, gençsiniz siz, girin dedi. Ne demekse yani. Demek ki o cenahta da algı biraz bozuk abi.